one of the significant concerns continually expressed by investors is that they don't have enough access to understand what the auditor does, what the audit produces. And something for the audit committee to think about is they have an opportunity within their proxy statement to really disclose how they oversee the audit, what that looks like, how they make decisions on retention of audit firms and so forth.
Joining me today is Amy Rojik, National Managing Partner of Corporate Governance with BDO. Amy, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Now, you were on a panel here at REITwise that provided a PCAOB and SEC non-legal update. What are the areas of focus on the PCAOB standard-setting agenda right now?
Well, I would say they have a very robust agenda, and it's all about modernizing the standards. And I think if you think about it, it really all revolves around audit quality through incorporating evolving technology, whether that's impacting the audit, the companies that auditors are auditing, or whether it's the audit technology that's being embedded in the audit work itself. And then holding auditors accountable for their own systems of quality is a big focus in terms of ethics, independence, and the longer term, and considering firm engagement level performance metrics. And then finally, kind of the current economic impacts, if you think about it, going concern, fraud, non-compliance with laws and regulations, et cetera.
And what are some of the projects on the PCAOB's agenda that are of particular interest to REITs and commercial real estate companies?
I would say a lot of what's on the agenda is pretty much industry agnostic. However, I would say some bigger ones that would be of consideration for this industry in particular, digital assets. So for example, in March, the investor advisory group that advises the PCAOB, and it's made up of a variety of individuals, really had a significant discussion around digital assets and what they mean, encouraging management and the audit committee to really focus on specific projects coming out by other regulators, the FASB, the SEC, on signaling in terms of the growing regulation around crypto, blockchain, and digital assets, and more broadly, the ease in which such assets can help in transactions, but as you've seen by recent headlines, the true need for very strong internal controls and oversight by governance. So that's one. And then from an economic standpoint, if you think about everything that's happening right now, there's a true emphasis on going concern, the valuation prospects in the real estate market given continued remote work, reductions in geographic footprint, interest rate and access to capital concerns, impairments of long-lived assets, and truly management's ability to be able to even forecast what the future holds. And then the last thing I'll point out here is the emphasis on fraud. Obviously, we're in an environment that really creates incentive and pressure for companies to perform, so really being mindful of how that may look in this current environment as we continue to struggle. And there's also a lot of emphasis, particularly with a new emphasis on auditing standard around kind of estimates and looking at bias and management judgments and things of that nature.
Could you give us an overview of the proposed PCAOB quality control standard?
Sure, and I'll kind of frame this because both the AICPA and the International Auditing Standards Board have their own quality control projects, in fact, final standards that are impactful for this year from an international perspective. So there's a lot of similarities in terms of what they're comprised of. There's really two process components, the firm's risk assessment process and the monitoring and remediation process for deficiencies and other things. And then there's 6 other components that really address the aspects of the firm's organization and operations, and that's around governance and independence and leadership and ethics, acceptance and continuance of client relationships and specific engagements, engagement performance, resourcing, and information and communications. But I say there's not complete convergence with these other standards because of the nature of SEC rules and regulations and other PCAOB standards that this impacts. So the requirements of involvement of independent individuals in firm level governance for largest firms is under consideration, ethics and independent components that are aligned with, as I mentioned, SEC and PCAOB existing requirements, and then specific requirements around firm technological resources, guidelines around the firm's voluntary publication of information. So firms produce voluntary audit quality reports, and there's a concern that this information really needs to be consistent and standardized. So having a structure for that, and then truly more structured approach to annually evaluating the firm's quality control system. And now there's a new form that the PCAOB has proposed that they will be required to file. It's a non-public form that'll go directly to the PCAOB, but along with that is the expectation and the requirement that the audit firm will be communicating to each of the audit committees of their issuer clients about their evaluation.
Right. And finally, what are some of the key topics that you see audit committees focused on in 2023?
Yeah, I actually love this question, so I'll take a page here from kind of the inspection process and include kind of the macroeconomic overlay, if you will. So increased activity with IPO and M&A activities to be on watchful for, widespread supply chain disruption, continued effects of COVID within specific industries. So if you think about the valuation of the real estate market, given all the things we discussed earlier, fluctuations obviously in interest rates and the inflationary trends and how that's affecting the volatility in financing and the ability to access and remain liquid. And then I'd say audit firm-wide risks. So if you're thinking about the audit process, increased staffing turnover, the effects of remote work, and then truly items around the quality of supervision and reviews, and obviously on-the-job training when they're working in a remote environment. And then I would say the recent PCAOB spotlights that have been directed at audit committees really look at some of the aspects of fraud risk and responsibility, independence, the use of service providers in the confirmation process, and CAMs. I know we're going to be talking about that in this conference. So understanding other areas that may not have risen to a CAM would be important to an audit committee, use of technology, continued areas of deficiencies, and then, as we just discussed, material crypto assets and transactions. And I think there's also an interesting aspect. I listened into the investor advisory group to the PCAOB's meeting most recently held in March. And one of the significant concerns continually expressed by investors is that they don't have enough access to understand what the auditor does, what the audit produces. And something for the audit committee to think about is they have an opportunity within their proxy statement to really disclose how they oversee the audit, what that looks like, how they make decisions on retention of audit firms, and so forth. And then lastly, I'll just add that understanding how ESG and sustainability matters are being focused on by not just the regulators, but are being part of the overall audit risk environment and how that impacts. So I think just thinking through all of those things is really important for the audit committee to consider at this juncture.